Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Whiteboard Wednesdays with Werner. And we're continuing our discussion around data science's new cloud offering, our public cloud offering called Oxide Cloud Services, or OCS for short. And with me, I've asked Rudolf to join us again. We chat about things AI and blockchain, and today we're talking cloud, right? So we're going to maybe just unpack a few of the topics that's out there around cloud providers and what's happening, and I think one of the big ones that we want to highlight today is the concept of a sovereign cloud.
100%.
And what does that basically entail? How does that apply to the South African market, for instance, especially with hyperscalers or local providers? What does that sovereignty entail, and what does it mean for organizations within the South African market, Rudolf?
Thanks, Werner. Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around data sovereignty and, for example, sovereign clouds. I mean, when the hyperscalers started building their in-country data centers, people are kind of saying, okay, well, that's a good way to get around the data sovereignty because we can put our data in that hyperscaler data center, which resides in South Africa, and we're covered. And it goes a little bit further than that. So from a data sovereignty point of view, it's that your data cannot leave the borders of the country for some instances, but also from a risk and compliance point of view, it's so that external companies can't get access to your data.
Yeah.
And I think that's
governments
even. Governments, exactly. Yeah. So if you look at the data sovereignty and the way that the hyperscalers reside, so for example, the US companies, all the US companies are subject to US legislation. So the US have what they call the Cloud Act, which actually they've designed to assist them in getting access to data that resides in the cloud, but it doesn't matter in the location. So if that data resides within one of the hyperscalers, which falls under the US jurisdiction, for example, the Microsofts, the Googles, basically all of the American companies. Under the Cloud Act, they can subpoena that organization in the US, and that organization needs to provide that data to the US government or to whoever subpoenas that data. Doesn't matter where it resides in the world. So as long as it's sitting on infrastructure that's owned by that organization, they need to supply that to the US courts.
Sure. That's quite an implication, obviously. I mean, and we're not just, we're not trying to just target,
100%.
Individual organizations or things. This is the situation.
That's the situation, exactly.
That is prevalent.
All the US companies fall under that rule.
Correct.
There is ways that they can mitigate. There's legal recourse if they want to lodge an objection, or whether there's ways that they can get around it.
Yeah, I'm sure they've got some form of liability cover, and they've got legal teams that might, depending, I guess, on the customer or whatever, or the situation, go and, represent,
100%.
against that. But I guess, what's your chances of that?
I think that's the main thing, is the risk associated with that, because then it becomes a lengthy, drawn-out legal process.
Correct.
And that is a risk that I don't think a lot of companies have appetite for. So just from a South African point of view, would I want all of my data or critical data? Look, there's data that in the hyperscalers, it's fine. It's not proprietary data. It's not data that falls under our PAPIA Act and under our data governance rules, which in the hyperscalers, fantastic. It's great. It's a cost-effective way of doing it.
Yeah.
But there is certain instances of data or classes of data that would you want to put that in an area where you could be potentially open to having that risk or being requested with an investigation, having that data exfiltrated to the US under a legal process, and then have to fight that process in the US. But that's not something you can fight in the South African courts. You would have to go with the hyperscaler and go and represent yourself and lodge that objection in the US courts.
So it's I'm not a legal expert or anything like that. We don't, pretend to be, but, these are the type of scenarios that, you start thinking about. And I think that's, so that kind of paints the picture of what that sovereignty or sovereign cloud or sovereign location actually means. It's not just the physical residential area of your data
100%.
where it lives, which is obviously a big one within the borders of the country. So South African governed organization that is subject to South African law, those are actually obviously then advantages to to or contributes to that
100%.
concept of sovereignty, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, that data that's governed under data sovereignty,
Yeah.
I think it's key just to look at, again, not all data being created equal. I think that's the key thing, is identifying those types of data and that high risk and that high confidentiality class of data under the Papaya Act and all of that, and making sure that that resides within an environment that is safe and secure and that is not subject to any other legislation than what is in place in South Africa.
A wholly owned South African entity,
100%.
a entity that is governed by South African law and legislation, and that provides that service within the borders of South Africa with nothing else linked to that. I mean, so OCS or Oxide Cloud is hosted within South African data centers, and legally, falls under the jurisdiction of South African law. So it's something to think about. I think it's
100%.
something that local organizations and local businesses need to understand. And we're not saying that it's that don't look at hyperscalers or other cloud services out there. I mean, when you think about SaaS services, which everybody subscribes to in some way or fashion from vendors, there's horses for courses, but understand what it means and what you're exposing.
I think the key thing is understand your data and understand the risks that you take with your organization's data. I think that's the main thing to look at.
Brilliant. Rudolf, thank you so much for the insightful conversation around sovereignty, and really good to have you with us again. We'll have a few episodes.
Thanks, Werner.
Thanks.